Good morning. It's a joy and a blessing to be with you today and for your grace as I hurried down to the hall. I appreciate that the pastor's study is only a couple feet away. Blessings to Pastor Katrina while she is on vacation. And as you heard earlier this morning, the pastor you had lined up this morning now is ill. So prayers for that pastor that they might heal quickly and recover quickly. And so instead of all those things in place, here I am. So it's a joy to be with you, and I'm grateful for the opportunity and that the timing worked out and I was available. As we dig into this Luke text, it's a tale as old as time. And no, it's not a Disney movie, but it is a theme that we actually see in Disney movies and Disney stories over and over again. In fact, in our own tradition, within Christianity, there are rules in place around this theme. In our tradition, they go back over 3,000 years in the Abrahamic faith tradition. Judaism put them in place, and then Islam and Christianity inherited them as the Abrahamic faiths, and other traditions have had rules around this for 5,000 and 7,000 years. That burning and seemingly eternal question is, of course, about money. Who has it? How much do you have? How much do they have? How do they get it? How do I get more? And why does someone else seem to have more and get more than me? I'm not sure how many of you in this room have ever had a conversation about money with family or friends. Maybe someone has had that conversation before. Maybe you've had that conversation with kids or grandkids or in Sunday school about how to use it when you put your penny in the offering plate or whatever that looks like. And I'm sure none of you noticed, that there was a lottery recently that was over $1 billion with a B. Like, hard to grasp, at least for my brain, what $1 billion is like. Some of you might have even put together a lottery list along the way. A lottery list, people tell me, is that list of things that if you won that unimaginable, unrealistic amount of money, what you would do with it. The list of all the things that you would do that are good, like pay off your student loans, your kids' student loans, or the whole neighborhood student loans, or maybe your pastors or visiting pastors' student loans. So if you did win, my wife has Venmo. We both went to seminary. We can let you know how to do that. But also all the incredible things you would do, those organizations that are dear to your hearts, those things that would change people's lives. $1 billion is a lot of money. Turns out it's only $400 million after taxes and things, but that'd probably still pay off most of my student loans. So here we are in this story from Luke. A brother comes to Jesus and is asking him, really he's kind of begging him to tell the older brother to give him more money, more of the family share. And there are several things going on here in this text that are important for our context. First is that in the Judaic tradition, the oldest son, the firstborn, inherited the majority of the family wealth. They got both the money and the property in a much larger portion than the younger brothers. And then, of course, in that time, the daughters would have inherited nothing. So only the older son got the most, and then the other brothers. And there is some good intent there, which is that the intent was by giving the majority to the older brother, the idea was that it would keep the family farm together. The family property would stay intact enough that the future generations would actually be able to sustain themselves and care for themselves. Because the older brother did also have responsibility for caring for all of the females in the family, as well as any widows of the younger sons and things like that. So there was some good thought there, which sounds like a pretty good deal if you're the older brother, but if you're the younger brothers, you can understand why they might be coming and asking questions and even think it's unfair. And it seems is another important factor here that the younger brother is standing before Jesus, asking him to make his older brother give him more of the money for a second important reason, and that is in Jesus' time, if there was a dispute in the family, they often went to rabbis. They went to the teachers to resolve these kinds of disputes. And this brother here clearly is seeing Jesus and approaching Jesus as a rabbi, as a teacher. So he's recognizing the authority of Jesus. He's recognizing who Jesus is in this moment. But I have bad news for this brother. If he came to Jesus thinking that he might get more money by talking to Jesus, he picked the very wrong rabbi. First, it's a rabbi who's probably not going to answer his question that's even being asked. And the answer he gets is definitely not going to be what he wants. Jesus' response is very classic for Jesus. Rather than responding to the particular request that is being made of him about the individual situation, instead, Jesus steps back and looks at the larger context. He zooms out and instead talks about greed and more specifically about your relationship with God and how money impacts and fits into the relationship with God. Jesus tells a story of a man who had such an incredible harvest that he didn't have a place to store all of his riches. He didn't then think to himself, you know what, I could transform my community. I could make sure that everyone has enough. I could make sure that the widows don't have to go around the edge of the field gleaning what's left. Instead, I could actually care for other people. Nope, he tore down all of his barns to build himself larger barns so that he could shove everything into them. And then Jesus' parable tells us that the next day he died. So he built these giant barns to store up all of his earthly possessions, and it was all for naught. I wonder if someone were asking Jesus this question today about the resources and what they do with their money and how do they get more and how do they get their family to share it with them. I wonder what Jesus' parable might be in that time or what his response would be. One story that jumps out for me very clearly from a more modern context is there was once a ruler of a country whose land was very large, and at least as far as we know, its resources were adequate. But the ruler decided he wanted more land, so he started trying to take other countries. And in so doing, he took control of the 8th largest supply of grain in the entire world and is now holding it hostage. Not because his people need more grain, which would be horrible and an atrocity to do, to take from another to feed his own people, but rather he's doing it because of power and greed. And in taking the 8th largest supply of grain in the entire world, he cut off the supply to places in the world most desperate for grain. Those places that don't have grocery stores where there are other options, where this grain is the only thing that will keep people alive. Unfortunately, these stories of greed are sadly present in every time and every place. And this time, the greed is having a global impact in ways that we have seldom seen in modern history. I think it's safe to assume that none of you have ever invaded another country. Is that true? Okay, good. Taken their land, taken their resources, taken their people, taken their grain, taken their money. But Jesus' question hopefully still hits home. But how is your relationship to money and God? Is money a conversation you can openly have with others? If it's not, why do you think that is? One of the things that is very present in most of Western culture is a sacredness around money. Sometimes that sacredness slips into money becoming an idol that can, in some cases, even completely replace God, and that money is what is worshipped rather than the creator of us all. I wonder, how often do you think about how you spend your money? And I don't mean how much are you saving for retirement, or whether you should buy the generic brand or the name brand, or even are you using your money wisely? But rather, how often do you think about what you believe and how you want to live as a beloved child of God, and how you spend your money as a reflection of your relationship with God? When Jesus responds to the question from the brother, he is certainly addressing greed and the way it moves through our lives and the world. And he's talking about how we use our resources even when greed is not involved. This includes questions like, Are you giving to organizations that reflect your faith? How much are you giving to your church? You don't need to shout it out. Just asking the question. Does your giving to your faith community reflect a faith of abundance or a faith of scarcity? A faith of abundance is one grounded in a God of abundance, one who provides, where there is enough of God's love for all of humanity, for all of creation, where there is enough joy, hope, grace, forgiveness for all. A faith where there are enough resources for everyone. Rather than one grounded in an understanding of, I need to make sure I get everything I need and want. And if there's enough left, then maybe others will get what they need and maybe what they want. Those are two very different understandings of God and very different ways of living God's unconditional love in the world. I would invite you to continue to think about your relationship with money and your relationship with God. How are the two interwoven? How might they be interwoven even more deeply? And as we move into communion together today, as we journey to the table of grace, may you experience God's abundance. There's no limit to God's grace. There are no bounds to God's unmerited and unconditional love. It is always more than we can ask or imagine. How might we live in a way that reflects God's abundance in our lives today and always? Amen.